Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1980 slasher film Terror Train. Now, Terror Train, in my opinion, is honestly one of the more underrated slashers of the 1980s. Honestly, I think it's one of the best slashers of the 80s, and it's one of my favorites. I've always enjoyed this film. The first time that I saw it, I had a good time with it, and every time since, there's just something that just keeps pulling me back towards it. It's a really nice, unique blend of like a whodunit mystery with a slasher, as well as a magic show, and a fun blend of camp and kitsch, as well as some genuine tension and horror. Now, the film is directed by Roger Spottiswoode, and this is actually his directorial debut. He had not directed a film before this. He had done editing on various other film productions, including some films directed by Sam Peckinpah, which is the main reason why Ben Johnson was actually a part of the cast. And for a first time director, the results here are honestly pretty remarkable, especially when you consider the limitations of the setting of the movie. The majority of the film takes place on this moving train and various different cars and parts of the train. And because of that, there's a certain inherent limitation. And I think with a lesser filmmaker, this would make it honestly really boring visually. But Spottiswoode is very skilled, and so what he winds up providing is something, in my opinion, rather special, because it's a movie that actually embraces the tighter, cramped, enclosed spaces, and as a result, a lot of the more intense or suspenseful sequences have some really nail-biting tension in them because of the way that the shots were framed and the way that Spottiswoode directed the film. And Spottiswoode also had a certain semblance of fun and playfulness to his direction as well, which was nice and definitely did add to the movie. And it's one of those films that visually, I don't think it really gets enough credit for how good of a job he does with various different types of framing, shot techniques, whether it's pans or zooms or different kinds of shots in general, to create a film that doesn't have this consistent sense of deja vu, this tiresomeness when it comes to the direction, because of the limitations of the setting and where the majority of the film takes place in. And when it comes to the few scenes that are outside of the train that are not dealing with those limitations, the direction still shines. So it's not one of those things where the director's limitations are hidden by the cramped space. He also does a great job when it comes to the few scenes that take place in more open spaces. So it's also a movie too that has a really great sense of atmosphere and mood, and I think the direction is also a big part of that. And yeah, I genuinely feel that Spottiswoode did a really great job directing this. And I honestly think it's one of his best films to this day when it comes to his direction. And he's directed a lot of movies that I felt he's done some really good work in, like Shoot to Kill and Tomorrow Never Dies and The Best of Times and so on and so forth. But I still think this ranks near the top when it comes to his direction. Now, Terror Train is written by T.Y. Drake, but there's also a couple other writers that are uncredited. One of them is the guy who actually came up with the concept for the movie, and Daniel Grodnick, and another one is Judith Rasco. And this screenplay, it's gotten a lot of criticism for how it handles the whodunit aspect, the addition of the magic tricks, its pacing, the lack of memorable or iconic kills. And in some ways, I can understand the critiques. Like, I would like to see a little bit more gore, a little bit more when it comes to the kills in this movie. But I don't think that's enough for it to be a bad script. And the red herring stuff, and the whodunit stuff, I actually think that was pretty well handled because it did a good job leading you away from the most obvious suspect until the twist is revealed at the end of the film. And a lot of the pacing stuff, I didn't really find it to be that poorly paced. I liked the magic tricks. It's something that makes this film stand out, makes it a little more unique. Like, hey, you get some slasher fun, but you also get some magic to go along with it. I mean, that's a pretty unique and enjoyable show if you ask me. It's Chris Angel Mind Freak before Mind Freak was a thing. But yeah, I genuinely think the script is actually, for the most part, really good. I think the opening is rather effective when it comes to establishing the origin of the killer and Kenny. It's a very horrific and disturbing prank. Like, it's bad enough that you're messing with this kid and forcing him to get laid. Otherwise, you're not going to allow him to be a part of the frat, or you're going to have him continue to be a pledge and give him all of that bullshit. And then he thinks he's gonna get laid, and then he gets traumatized with the corpse of a dead woman that's rotting. Yeah, I would probably go mad too, or at least have a mental breakdown if I had to experience that. So I think it's a good setup in terms of the origin of the killer, and it's a good motivation for him ultimately doing what he does. I mean, I'm not going to condone it, but it's still something that gives him a good motive. And then it flashes forward to 3 years later, and then a lot of people from the same frat and sororities from the New Year's Eve a party gone wrong. They decide to put on one last party before everybody graduates, a New Year's Eve costume party aboard a train. And that's when you get to know the main characters better. Like, you got a little bit of Alana because she was roped up into the prank at the beginning, but didn't really know how far it was going to go. You've got Doc, who was the guy who was behind all of it, and his cronies. But there's some other people that you get introduced to, like Mitchie, who is Alana's best friend. Uh, you have Mo. You've got Kenny, who, of course, Kenny, you already were introduced to earlier on. But, you do have some other people. Jackson, Mary, Ed, as well as this magician, and some other characters like Karn, the guy who is the train conductor, the guy who is responsible for the entire train, and a mysterious female assistant who is working with the magician. And I think the script does a good job, despite the lack of character depth for a lot of these characters, other than Alana, making these characters still feel like real people and giving them moments to shine when it comes to having little bits of charisma, uh, and some fun quotes or some fun lines with one another, or just different exchanges with each other. It just created a good, fun mix of characters who had their own distinct personalities. And I think that definitely does help the script because, yeah, maybe you might not know that much about Mitchie, but when she is ultimately killed, you still feel bad because you get a little glimpse of the friendship that she has with Alana, and it feels like something that's rather strong. And there's other stuff like that throughout the script that help flesh out these characters, despite the fact that there's not a lot there when it comes to character depth. And once the body count starts, when Ed gets killed by the killer and the killer puts on the Groucho Marx mask, which that was a good touch, as well as all the other different costumes and masks. Like, I think a lot of the masks were honestly pretty creepy and freaky and weird. And honestly, in a lot of ways, scary enough on their own without having a psycho killer behind them. But that is an element of the film that I feel is just consistently suspenseful because the killer could be anywhere and you wouldn't even know it. And just the thought of that, it gives me chills. That you could be in the room with the killer and you'd have no idea because it's a costume party and everybody's wearing costumes. And it's actually normal for people, if they want, to be wearing a full costume. So it's we could just wearing a mask and then walking around killing people, and you wouldn't be able to find who it is. At least not quickly, and not quickly enough before there's a significant body count. The way that the killer kills people, I get it. People think it's kind of boring. Okay, he stabbed the guy early on, Ed, and stole his costume. He goes into a bathroom and takes this other guy and smashes his head into a mirror. He slashes somebody's throat. He hides in a room and takes one guy out and decapitates him, and you see his decapitated head fall on the ground in an aftermath shot. So there's not really a lot in terms of like that ooh, like oh, or like oh damn, like kind of reaction to any of these kills comparison to some of the other slasher movies. So I would say that that is something that isn't really that great, but everything else is so good about this script and about this movie that it more than makes up for it, in my opinion. Because even the red herring aspect, even the whole whodunit aspect, even I think that is really well done. Because, you think that it's Kenny, rightfully so. But then the film gives you some hints and some clues and honestly makes you start to think otherwise. It actually does a good job making you honestly convince yourself that it could be a different suspect. And when you get to the twist, when Kenny's identity is revealed, it's honestly pretty shocking. I I've seen this film quite a few times, and I keep forgetting that twist because I get wrapped up into everything and into the story and into the characters and into everybody's plight. And I think the magic tricks actually are a positive for this film because it's a unique way to lighten the tension, to lighten the mood in a way that only Terror Train can. There really aren't a lot of other movies that have magic tricks performed by the one and only David Copperfield. So I don't really feel that that's really a problem with the movie. I've seen people say that, oh, it's just 10 minutes of magic tricks. And I'm like, that's not really it. Like, the magic tricks are still broken up throughout the rest of the movie. It's not just 10 minutes straight of magic tricks. Like, if it was 10 minutes straight of magic tricks, I would understand people's problem with those scenes, but it's not. So I don't really understand that. And I think that's honestly more than a little bit of an exaggeration. And as everything goes on and more dead people and dead bodies start popping up, the way that it ratchets up the tension and the suspense is honestly some of the best that you will see in the genre. Like the whole scene where Doc is just frantically trying to find where the killer is in a room that he's locked himself in, and he thinks he's figured it out, only for the killer to show up from underneath him and grab his leg and kill him. That is a scene that, despite the fact that this is a character who is honestly a massive dick, that guy is a total douchebag. You still feel the suspense, you still feel the tension because of the way that the sequence is put together. And when it gets to the point where Alana is now the one that's being stalked by the killer one on one, the tension then just goes through the roof. And it's genuinely, in my opinion, one of the more suspenseful slashers out there. Even when they stop the train, you're still in trouble. But you're in a little bit less trouble than you were before because you couldn't escape and you can't get off the train. Um, and I like the scene when Kenny is face to face with Alana. It's creepy, and you just honestly, genuinely don't necessarily know what Kenny's gonna do next, and I think that just the way that everything is set up in terms of the climax, I also feel is very satisfying. Because initially, oh, Alana takes him out, and it's kind of like, okay, all right, that's an okay, decent way to dispatch the killer. But you didn't actually get to reveal who the killer is. So that would have been disappointing in that regard. But it then just tops that. Like that whole scene where the killer is outside and climbing past the window while, Alana's just sitting there helpless. That is a really wild sequence, and definitely something that sticks with you because it's really creepy. Like just the thought of it, that it's over and I'm just resting, and then the killer is still alive and he's right outside my window. And then the whole finale that also is a callback to the events that started everything when Kenny was understandably traumatized by the prank, and it's all wrapped up in the curtain. He's reliving that and gets wrapped up again, and then he gets taken out by the conductor, which I thought was a fun addition because I liked that character. It was nice that he had a moment to shine and hit Kenny over the head with the shovel, and then you have that shot of Kenny falling out of the train into the icy water below, and the tracking shot that tracks Kenny's body floating in the ice. Like, this is a really nice way to culminate things. And despite the fact that, yeah, there's not really a lot of unique or memorable kills, there's still blood. It's still very visceral. It's still intense. And I think it still definitely provides a fair amount of scares. And not just of the jump scare variety. Some stuff that genuinely is fairly unnerving. So it's a screenplay to me that's effective when it comes to the mystery element. It's effective when it comes to the characters, especially Alana, who I think is one of the more underrated final girls out there. She's got a very clear arc here. You sympathize with her because you feel for her when it comes to her involvement with the prank and how she didn't know it was going to be that bad. And it's something that she carries with her. And the moment when she's face to face with Kenny, and the moments that she deals with throughout the film, facing the guilt, overcoming it, and also at the same time triumphing over it, is honestly really satisfying. And it's definitely one of the more strong and genuinely inspiring heroines when it comes to slasher films that doesn't really get enough credit for it because of the fact that she dealt with it. She was even not putting up with Doc's crap throughout the movie. She was willing to call him out on his bullshit. She was willing to deal with her boyfriend and not necessarily buying into his takes on things and his excuses. So there was a lot of things about her character, in my opinion, that were really well written. And that's a good example of a genuinely strong female character in a horror movie. And I do feel that it's got a good mix of suspense as well as fun. So it's campy at points, but not to the point where it comes across as too corny to me. And it's a film that you could say is rather simple when it comes to its plot, but then that isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when you execute it fairly well. And I think, yeah, Terror Train does that. The screenplay is on the right track throughout the majority of the film, other than the fact that would have maybe liked to have seen a, a, a few more kills or have the kills be a little bit more unique or interesting. But other than that, I don't really have any major issues with the screenplay for Terror Train. The cast, I think, is wonderful. You have Ben Johnson, who is Karn, the train conductor. I genuinely feel this is one of his better performances. He does a lot with a little here. Uh, really liked this character, liked a lot of his different exchanges with different characters. He just felt like a stand-up guy. And it was honestly awesome to see him be the one to take out the killer and get him off his train. Um, Jamie Lee Curtis, this is honestly one of her more underrated performances as Alana. She shot this back to back with Prom Night, and I think her performance in this is a lot better than her performance in that film. Yeah, she's got the Scream Queen stuff, screaming her head off, but there's more to it than that. And I could definitely see that Jamie was really up for it and really believed in what she was doing, and she turned in a very strong performance as a result. Uh, Hart Bochner was a lot of fun as this just douchebag jock named Doc. Uh, and you had Sandee Currie who played Mitchie, who was only in it for a little bit, but she was you know easy on the eyes and also had a genuinely sweet personality, and felt she had some good chemistry with Jamie Lee Curtis when it comes to the few scenes that they had with one another. Timothy Weber as Mo was fine enough. So was Anthony Sherwood as Jackson. Vanity is Mary. It's always nice to see the lovely Vanity. And she was fine too. David Copperfield, despite the fact that he apparently hated working on the movie because he couldn't really get his lines down, I felt his performance was fine. It was more than fine, actually. I thought he did a pretty decent job. And I liked Howard Busgang, who played Ed, the comic relief guy, before he got killed, taken out by the killer. And speaking of the killer, Derek MacKinnon, I honestly feel he did a really good job as Kenny. The scene when he's unmasked is really intense and creepy. And I think a lot of that has to do to the intensity that Derek brought to the role. For a guy who it wasn't an actor, he was a drag performer, that was cast in the film, he turned in a pretty memorable performance, if you ask me. So I genuinely feel that he helped elevate the film. Um, and honestly, he's a big reason why the twist works because of his experience in drag. Because I didn't know, I had no idea. I just thought that was a female assistant. Like, that was not something that crossed my mind when I first saw this movie. So when the twist was ultimately revealed at the end, it genuinely kind of blew my mind. And I think a big part of that is because of how well uh, Derek is able to sell that. The film features some absolutely astounding cinematography by John Alcott. This is the same cinematographer who worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey and a lot of other Kubrick films. And that experience is definitely on display here. For a, fairly cheap slasher movie, this film looks incredible. The way that he worked with light and shadow, the way that he used varying lighting techniques inside of the train car is something that honestly is amazing. He made it look just really simple and really easy, but what he did and what he was able to put together is nothing short of spectacular when you look up all the different types of lighting and all the different types of things that he did in order to light and shoot the film. Um, there's a big reason why this film to this day has a lot of people praising its cinematography, and it's because John Alcott is just an amazing cinematographer. And he's so good that even with the slasher movie, he can make it into something that's a cut above other slasher films from around this time period, and just other films in general. The editing by Ann Henderson, I also felt for the most part was really great, especially when it comes to the scenes with the killer walking amongst everybody, or the scenes that are really trying to build tension and general suspense. And the music by John Mills Cockle, I also liked. It wasn't something that I would probably buy on vinyl or CD and listen to again and again, but it was still a score that was effective in terms of creating a certain mood, a certain feel, and a certain atmosphere for the movie. And the songs weren't like the most catchy songs ever, that were used for the movie, but they worked fine for what they were when it comes to the band that play live throughout the film. And I think it is a well-paced movie. I know there's a lot of people who disagree, think it's slow, gets slow in the middle, there's too much magic tricks, there's not a lot happening, it's too boring. I disagree. I didn't find it to be that boring. I didn't find it to be that slow paced. Uh, I felt it was pretty well paced throughout. And yeah, I genuinely do feel that this is a really solid film, a really solid slasher, and I think it deserves its cult following that it's gotten over the years. And this is a really solid release too by Scorpion and Ronin, which has a new transfer that was not on the Scream Factory release, and new interviews. Has a new interview with the director that wasn't on that release, and a new interview with Judith Rasco, as well as the other features from the previous releases. Um, so yeah, that's just my thoughts on Terror Train. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.